right now. So I shared the screen with this factoid here that said 1 in 4 children live in a home without a dad. All right. So now, what are you guys viewing that? Because that's a lot. That's a
You know,
big number.
it's funny because honestly, I would expect like maybe 2 out of 4, like 1 out of 2 kids instead of 1 out of 4. To be honest with you,
So that's what you guys think it's looking like right now.
I think the 1 out of 4 is I was surprised because honestly, I thought it was gonna be like I said 1 out of 2 because of my personal experiences with like people I know. But
Uh-huh.
yeah, that's definitely a lot of kids. And obviously you guys know what a father figure is supposed to be and the guidance that they bring. So that's a scary statistic right there.
Yeah, it's crazy. That's still 25%.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I thought it would be more, to be honest, but no,
yeah,
that's a lot. That's a lot, dude.
25%.
25% is a lot to begin with.
Exactly. So
Because
25.
we're talking about 25% of the billion population, billions in
Right,
population, right? So
right.
that's still a large number. Um, so I was thinking, there's especially now with the protesting and the riots and what's been going on in the inner city as far as African American males, and their experiences with the law enforcement. How you think that are the young men, I should say, adolescents, even children, toddlers that are seeing these images and they don't have a father figure to explain it from a male point of view. Like, how do you think that would shape their world, shape their narrative as they're walking through their communities, going to school and things like that?
I mean, it's tough. I think it's definitely a challenge for sure, just because instead of hearing it from somebody, um, now you have to experience it for yourself to learn it. They say that, smart people learn from their mistakes, but like smarter people learn from others people's mistakes. So instead of having that person to like, hey, I've gone through this as a black male, and this is what you want to do if you go through it. They don't have that. So now they have to go through it to learn the nuances of how to act when you're outside of your house in this kind of environment. So I think that definitely adds to the challenge.
I definitely agree with Ben on that. I think being fatherless during this time period, it's going to be a number of ways like young men can be affected by this, right? And it's going to be dependent on what they're consuming and how close they are to what's happening, right? So for the young people that's actually out there protesting, and which is a considerable amount of young people that's been out there leading the charge, um, their interactions with law enforcement during this time period can actually be a make or break moment for them. I know you guys have probably seen there's been some opportunities where law enforcement has taken the opportunity not just to police the rioting or the protesting, but to actually be a part of it. So I think right now this is law enforcement's opportunity to despite what happened in Minneapolis, to also build bridges with young men in a way that they haven't had a chance to, or haven't taken the opportunity to, right? So I know for me growing up, I have a relationship with police officers that was good and bad, right? And one of my most positive experiences with a police officer was a police officer by the name of Ray. That when I was when my mom used to work in summer, she used to work in the summertime, and all I wanted to do was play ball, and I wasn't part of the PAL, and I was just accompanying my mom, and he would let me just rock out in the gym, even though I wasn't part of PAL. I just wanted to play ball, and it was nothing to him, right? So for me, that has had a lasting positive impact on me to show me that not all police officers are bad. But then I've also had experiences in my adulthood where I've gotten pulled over just before I got pulled over before even pulling out, right? So I have these balanced experiences. So I say that to say, depending on the vantage point of what these young people are consuming and their proximity to what's happening, is definitely going to shape, even without their fathers, is going to shape how they see law enforcement and how they see the situation as a whole.
How about you, Mike?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Benjamin and Gary. I think it's important, definitely, the influence of the man in the house in a time such as this, when you know black men have died at the hand of authority, of police, those who are already in a position of power, right? And Caucasian at that, right? Police, Caucasian. So there's um, these two different positions of power that they sit on, right? And with that, I think the male influence in the house, I think, is necessary, maybe in some ways more than ever for the black men or men of color, right? And it's just also important, I think, what kind of influence it is as well. If let's say men are present, right? Because it's one thing to have an absent male, and it's another thing to have one who can also shed light, but then there's also the possibility that one might not do that. Because it's interesting how young men without an influence of fathers, at times when I talk to my guys, it's just like, F the police, F the police this or the police that. And I try to get at the root of why. Why is that the mentality? Why is that the mindset? And it comes off to me like it's a sense of like there's a lack of respect that they're not getting from this person who's in a position of authority, who they've seen has utilized the system to their disadvantage. So then it's like, how do we or men who are in the household, how do we then step in to where there's this gap, and talk to them and still be this uplifting force, but at the same time recognize what's going on and not come at it from a place of just, as I guess I'll say, like, F the police. Like, how do we come at it from this tempered place where we recognize the hurt and pain because we're black men talking to our black sons or whatever the case might be, but at the same time recognize, the situation is messed up, and how do we, have that conversation with them and then not create higher tensions and fuel the fire, so to speak, even further. So I think it's like a delicate balance, and it's not easy.
It's definitely interesting that you said that because two things. My wife and I, we sat down with the kids and we were talking to them about the protest, not really the riot so much, but the protest and why people are protesting, right? And then we started speaking. There are, we did mention that there are some people out there that they're not just protesting, they are rioting, and how dangerous that is. But the flip side of that also is that their uncle is a police officer. And my son asked me, he was like, "Oh, is my uncle gonna beat me up?" I was like, "No, no, 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 no." And I had to explain to him, like, they are just like everyone else. You have good and bad. And like my wife and I would tell him, like, there's some officers out there who are bad, but not all of them are. They, like their uncle. And they're just like their uncle. There are some officers out there who are, their purpose to show up to work every day is to protect and serve. And it was weird walking that line and explaining to him, and he's only 5. He's 5 years old. For him to ask that question was, it threw me back a little bit, And then the other thing is, Sesame Street and CNN had a town hall meeting for kids and families, right? And it was all about what's going on as far as the riots and the protests and the police brutality. And to, it was amazing some of the questions that these kids asked. And I'm talking about from 5 to 16, right? All the questions that came, not all, majority of the questions that came in were questions from kids asking, are the cops going to kill me? Are the cops going to hurt me? What do I do? How should I approach the situation? And then you have that. I remember there's one parent that came on, and she said, how do as a parent, how do I have this conversation with my child? How do I explain to them the country? Yes, the country is hurting. It's an emotional time right now, but I also, as much as I want them to understand the emotion behind what's going on, you don't want your child to start just disrespecting police officers out there. You don't want them to start going out there and just doing whatever, that would put them in harm's way. So I know you guys aren't parents, but Mike, I know you work with some young men. Like, have you guys had to have this conversation with them as to how to approach, how like their perspective as to what's going on?
Yep, we've had some pretty intense conversations in this time. We do still hold Zoom calls with the guys twice a week. And so it gets, I feel like it's funny how I think not funny, but the conversations now I think have been more intense and more heated in a good way than when we were like meeting in person still. There's just a lot of, I think just a lot of just frustration and even in some ways maybe like this just animosity with like authority. And I don't say that in judgment of my guys. I mean, that's just what it is. Like, it's just like I'm one of the guys why do they need my ID? Like, why do they need to, approach me and like, I'm walking down the street or whatever the case is, why do you need to stop me? If you didn't have your badge on right now, it would be what it is without that. Like, basically saying like, you would be a person just like me. And ultimately that's what they are. Like, everybody's a person at the end of the day, regardless of our roles or responsibility. Everyone's a person. And I think with what they were getting to, and I was trying to kind of dig, it's a bit hard when you got, a lot of people on the line, but I was trying to get at is just, there's a sense of like, I mentioned before, like this dignity. So we've been having these conversations, just talking about like, like what do you do when, when the police approach you, keep it a buck. Some of our guys say, they take off, or they, like cops try to, or they, they riding off if they're on their bike, whatever the case is. And that's, I can't judge them. That's their the defense mechanism. That's, I know if the cops come up to me or whatever the case is, this is what I'm going to do. And I think it's in part because of the relationship that's, kind of been fostered in the hood with the police. We don't mess with the police. That's the general theme. So these conversations, yeah, we've been having for sure. Yeah.
Has any of it the conversations, has any conversations, like you said, have they been like, as it the emotions, are the emotions raw? Are they like really are they to the point where they're trying to like go out there and join the riots or anything like that? Or how do they feel about that?
I think that's the thing about it. I think maybe that's something that we could discuss with them, like, because it's a bit hard because we're in a place where we're under the quarantine, and trying to, help them to understand like how they can take action or mobilize, but then also be mindful of the fact like, this whole, if I'm being honest, the whole COVID thing exists. So it's like, trying to be mindful of that. Like we want to take action, we want to mobilize, we want to empower our young men. We also want them to be wise at the same time. But yeah, at the moment, like, I feel like they're definitely experiencing this hurt, but I know one guy in particular that stated like, he was talking about, he mentioned in his words particular the status quo of the Black man and, his dissatisfaction with everything that's been going on. He's well aware, young guy, in his 20s, well aware of how slavery has impacted us today and how that still reverberates to what we see in law enforcement and things like that. But to his frustration, it's just like he's tried to mobilize and tried to create a section or place to have a platform to be able to talk about these things. And for what it sounds like, it fell through. So he's at a place where he has this knowledge and he has this desire to see change, but yet he tried to mobilize and it's failed, or hasn't succeeded for whatever reason. So I extended to him like, hey, what would it look like when we do get back into a space where we can sit? What about doing a podcast, and having that space where we can honestly sit and chop it up and talk about these very things. Like I think this could be that platform that he's seeking, and also other young men, to be able to kind of have that dialogue, and we can talk about action and how we can step outside of the room where we talk about it and actually get out there and do something like tangible. So I think that's more or less like where the conversation kind of led to.
Okay. What about you, Gary? What's your take on the fatherlessness and how it might be affecting the youth in the city right now?
It's interesting because fatherlessness is this thing that's been just permeating not only our communities but so many communities for such a long time, right? In addition to COVID, in addition to another incident like George Floyd. So um, I know young men are hurting. I mean, you had young men who were hurting before any of this happened, right? So um, once again, I think it's just going to take a community. I saw an interesting interview. I think it was on CNBC where a young man, I think he was like 16 years old. You guys might have saw it. Where he didn't know him, but he actually spoke to this young man, and the young man was, if I'm not mistaken, the young man was actually at a protest, and he was trying to bridge the gap between the protesters and the police officers. And he was trying to kind of like be a mediator, and I believe he ends up getting pepper sprayed or something like that. And he's like 16 years old, and he's confused. Like, I was trying to mediate this situation, and I got pepper sprayed. Like, how does this work? But there was another gentleman who spoke to him, and I think he was in his 30s or 40s. And there was another man. He was like, we've been going through this for generations. And pretty much this man who didn't know this young man told him, like, it's up to you. Pretty much empowered him. It's up to you and your generation to continue this fight, because as you can see, it's been happening for generations. So um, just continuously empowering our young people. And I think as a whole, we have to know that protesting is part of the solution. Part of the solution. Um, there's so many other things that have to happen. There's so many other actionable steps that have to happen in addition to protests, right? I think protesting has been great. We know that protesting gets the attention and it builds awareness, but there's some other things, some other tangible things that have to happen. That's going to require organization for our young men to be a part of, and to really change what's happening for them, and continuously, like what Mike is doing, and continuously giving young men opportunities to talk. Because working with young men, the years I've been working with them, it's a hard, you got to dig to really get to how they feel, right? Because many of them, A, don't get too many venues to talk about how they feel, and B, some of them really can't express in words how they feel, right? So the anger and frustration might not be anger and frustration. It might be disappointment. It might be hurt, but they don't really know how to pinpoint what that emotion is. And as men, many of us are still trying to learn how to identify what is the real emotion, what's the real issue. So giving them continuously opportunities to express themselves and also empowering them to do more after protesting.
Point well made. That's something we definitely need to explore as to how do you navigate your emotions that you're experiencing now, and then once this is all, once this is done, it doesn't go back to business as usual, you know. Benjamin, how about you? What's your take on the on how young men may be affected?
Ron, as in terms of what's going on and not having a father figure in there, is that what you're,
Yes.
just to clarify? I mean, it's definitely just the guidance for me, right? It's like your dad is supposed to be, you look up to that father figure for guidance, and not having that right now for most people right now, or for 25% um, of the kids right now in these really sensitive times is really detrimental. Because yeah, you see all the news, you see all that, but it's good to have a conversation with somebody at home that you could ask questions about what's going on. And I think the most discriminated group of people, obviously, I think the black male is the most discriminated. And like I said before, it's like the growing up process is a lot of teaching, right? But when you don't have that figure to teach you certain things to do or to not do in terms of how to act as a black, as a black person in this country, it's tough if you don't have that. So I think for me, the biggest thing is just not having the guidance that's definitely needed for times, times like what we're going through right now as a community, as people.
It's definitely tough, and like you said, emotions are raw. um it's time like these that I feel like mental health is definitely something that's important, because navigating emotions is not always easy, uh and being able to recognize what you're feeling and adapting the tools to deal with it, that in itself is challenging, so not being able to recognize it is definitely it's probably, sometimes it might feel insurmountable. And one thing that I realize also, that young children that don't have a father figure in their life, one thing that they may be dealing with is depression. you know um, it came to my attention that someone that I know, if she's a teenager, her friend committed suicide last night.
Oh man.
So I don't know the details, that if she had both parents or not, but I could only imagine that a child that doesn't have their father to help them navigate the emotions that's broiling right now, like, how are they going to be able to deal with it? And it must be difficult. And depression is a scary thing, because it kind of sneaks up on you. So mental health is something that I think is very, very important, especially now. and that's something we definitely need, and especially if in the city, that's something we definitely need to work on. You know, like, don't feel weak if you have to seek help in navigating how you feel. Don't just don't feel weak having to seek help. Period. Don't feel that that makes you less of a man, because there's not, saying that I need help, that alone takes a certain level of strength. That's my that's definitely my take on it.
That's huge, man. I'm sorry to hear about that young woman.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
You know,
As
Ron, you said something. You said something crucial, like being able to ask for help, and so that goes back to part of our narrative that has to be revised, right? Where we're oftentimes told to, whether it's directly or indirectly, to, man up,
Yeah.
and be strong, right? And
mm,
no matter how strong you are, we're all finite human beings at the end of the day. We do get weary, we do get tired, right? So, um, and I've even, read articles and research that some of the greats like MLK, man, he's had bouts with. I mean, think about what he went through, right? Like, if Martin Luther King said he was going through depression, you wouldn't even fault him, because everything that he went through, between being on this high alert of having your house bombed, or the threat and eventual like assassination of him, people throwing bricks at him. That would put any human being on edge.
That's true.
It will put any human being on edge. And we remember MLK for being amazing, but I can only imagine if we were able to hear some of his thoughts about what he was mentally and emotionally going through, we could probably see some things, man.
yeah.
So
I
yeah,
think.
I agree, man.
I think.
Asking,
Oh. Yeah, go ahead, Gary. My fault.
no, I'm good, Mike. It's all you, bro.
Um, now this is good, man. I was just thinking, um, one thing I've observed with our young guys, and this is, I think, to your point, Ron, it's just like, I guess to Gary's point as well, man, this man up culture, the negative aspect of it, that is, where it's just like, you beat your chest in the face of emotion and you power through it. I think in times like this, I think, young men of color, young black men in particular, have to be extra careful, in the sense that, not saying they have to be protected. What I'm saying is that oftentimes we go through trauma unassessed. When that's like, let's say, a father not being in the home or things like that, because oftentimes how our young men perceive it when I speak to them is just like, yeah, I'm good. Like, I didn't grow up with them, whether they see him every now and then or not at all, it's just like, I think what it is, or what I've gotten, is kind of like, I'm here. Like, I'm talking to you, I'm chilling, I'm good, mom's at home, taking care of her, I'm straight. But there was this thing that was lacking your entire life, and you may not see it, and it's like, it's not our job to say, hey, you have trauma, because that's insensitive. And it doesn't help. But it's our job to kind of say, hey, have you ever looked at this, or have you ever thought about it in this light? What are your thoughts on this thing? And I think the reason I'm saying that young men of color right now, those who may not, who have unaddressed trauma, have to be extra just alert, because you have unaddressed trauma, and then you had this crazy thing on top of it, with the protesting going on right now and the emotions that are flaring because of this injustice that has occurred. With that, you definitely have to be mindful of where you are. Like, especially, we're told to man up. We're not told to go to therapy or go to counseling. We're not told that. So it's like, you have to be mindful of your state, but oftentimes that's not encouraged in the Black community. So I think that definitely goes to your point, Gary, about the whole man up thing. It's definitely toxic. And like MLK. Like oftentimes we think about leaders and what they should do or be doing, but we don't think about the emotional state of where they are. So you just have me thinking about that now. Like a lot of people fought Barack Obama, like, oh, he didn't do enough for black people, and I wish he would have done more, and and it's just like I
He's a
wasn't in
human
his
being.
shoes. Right, exactly. He can only do so much. There's checks and balances. So I don't know what he could have done better, or what else could have happened. But yeah, that's something to really think about because we're human too. Yeah, it's real.
When you was talking, Mike, I was thinking about something too. Like when we came up, we had like in our youth, we had the Rodney King riots, right? 92, 91,
Oh
Right.
man, yeah.
right? That was us in New York being able to see what was happening in LA on the other side of the country, right?
Mm-hmm.
In a way that for many of us, when we was coming up, we didn't have like full access to the experience of our other brothers and sisters the way we do now, right?
Right.
Right. So think about this, like our young people are growing up in a time where they are literally, there's some young people right now that they were born into and they've been experienced everything. Their life starts with Trayvon and Freddie Gray and all these countless, like, so they're hearing this like multiple experience. We were just experiencing like what was happening in New York, right? And we were seeing things and we were having our own experience. So a kid in New York right now, not only is he bombarded with his own experience of what's happening in his local neighborhood, but he's also bombarded with the many of other issues that because of social media and technology, now he's in touch with what's happening in Minneapolis, in Texas, in Tennessee. So I can only imagine how our young people feel in New York and these other places where they're inundated with what's happening all the time, where they probably, I don't know how they feel, but they're probably saying to themselves like, man, it ain't safe nowhere. Like I'm not safe in New York. Even if I move to Minneapolis, I ain't safe there. So I say that, man, they are bad in a way that we can't, with all the atrocities that's happening. And I can only imagine how that's weighing on them and how they're processing it. Like I don't know how they're doing it.
Yeah, and going back to that's what I meant about guidance. Right now is the time that with all of this, you got to process all of this as like for us. I mean, even for us as older people, or older than the younger kids.
Whoa! I'm about to say, man. Like, where you going with this, man?
Even for us, it's tough to process. More
Yes.
what
Yes.
and if you're a teenager or even preteen or even worse, like 5-6 years old asking. I saw this video on Instagram. It was heartbreaking. This girl was like, "Are you gonna shoot me?" And she was like 6 years old to a cop. And it's definitely scary times, and more so than ever now, people need the guidance. And going back to the discussion before with 25% pretty much of the population not having the father figure, that's makes it more important now than ever to have that in the household. So I'm assuming it's even tougher for the kids now without that figure in their household to navigate through all the emotions and just everything that's going on. Not even just now, but like you said, Gary, this has been with social media. I mean, Amadou Diallo, Sean Bell, like it's been going on. Obviously, it's a cycle, right? So you gotta process what's going on now, and then you look back and like, man, it's systemic. And now you're, as a kid, you're even more confused. So you're like, why does it keep happening? So yeah, father figures is definitely much more needed now, more so than ever, I think.
I mean, at the same time, we're not saying this to detract from, a mother's role. It's just, they're both needed, and they're both needed to be present.
Right.
And I think that's the operating word, right? Present physically, emotionally, spiritually, being present there at the times that your child needs you. It's definitely what's needed. Um,
Definitely.
all right. Yeah, man. This was good, fellas. We can definitely. I definitely see this blossoming into something really positive. You know.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, man. Thank you for the insight, man. Thank you
Yeah,
for
that was cool. That was
peace.
cool.
And you guys are definitely a blessing, man. I appreciate you guys being a part of this, man. Thanks.
Glad to
No
be here.
doubt.